First, welcome to Bookish Podcast Special Episode 13. If you look closely at ancient Greek battle records, there are these really baffling moments.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, where entire front lines of advancing armies didn't just rout, they froze. They dropped dead with muscles locked so tight their flesh literally felt like stone.
Yeah, just instant rigidity.
And for centuries, we looked at the statues and the artwork and called it the myth of Medusa, like just a bedtime story for you to hear about a cursed monster.
Right, just a fairy tale.
But today on this deep dive, we have forensic toxicology reports that suggest it was actually a highly classified Bronze Age biological weapon.
It completely upends the way we view classical antiquity. I mean, when we approach these ancient texts, we're just so trained to filter them through this lens of fantasy.
Oh, for sure. We always assume it's just magic.
Exactly. We assume these were primitive people trying to explain things they didn't understand.
Yeah.
But the stack of sources we are diving into today argues that we have been, fundamentally misreading the data.
Like completely missing the point.
Yeah. We aren't looking at mythology. We are looking at an encrypted record of ancient chemical warfare.
And just so you, the listener, know exactly what we are working with today, we have 3 incredibly provocative sources on the table.
They have fascinating reads.
Really dense, but incredible. The first is a paper called Gorgon Science, The Forensic Alchemy of Medusa. The second is this really extensive medical breakdown titled Medusa, The Toxicology of Ancient Chemical Warfare.
And the third one is the tactical breakdown.
Right, a tactical analysis known simply as the Medusa Protocol. And the core thesis across all 3 is that Medusa was an early record of advanced biosynthetic paralytic chemical warfare.
Which is a lot to take in, I know.
It's a huge claim. We are talking about bridging the gap between myth and ancient toxicology.
Which is, frankly, a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah.
I mean, if you accept the premise of these papers, you really have to abandon the idea of the monster in the cave entirely.
So no cursed woman hanging out with snakes.
No, none of that. Instead, you have to start looking at Medusa as a multi-vector delivery system for aerosolized biosynthetic neurotoxins.
Okay, wow. That sounds so modern.
It really does. And more than that, the sources argue the story itself was a coded technical manual. It was, designed to teach ancient military engineers how to handle, deploy, and synthesize these incredibly volatile chemical agents.
Now, you listening to this right now might be thinking, come on, the ancient Greeks didn't have chemical engineering.
I think everyone has that initial reaction.
I had the exact same thought when I first opened these files. But to really test this theory, we have to deconstruct the most famous, iconic aspect of the myth.
The petrifying stare.
Right. The idea that if you look directly at her, you turn to stone. If we strip away the magic, what is the physical mechanism here?
Well, the sources ask us to look at the anatomy of the human eye. The traditional narrative is, like you said, a magical spell cast through eye contact.
Right, making eye contact with a monster.
But from a toxicological standpoint, that petrifying stare is perfectly described as a high-pressure aerosolized delivery system for ocular entry neurotoxins.
Ocular entry, meaning the weapon specifically targets the eyes.
Yes, exactly.
But if I'm an ancient commander, trying to take down an enemy army, why focus on the eyes? Wouldn't a respiratory gas be much easier? You just flood the battlefield and make them breathe it in.
It seems easier, but respiratory actually requires volume, and it requires the target to inhale a sufficient dose.
Which they might not do.
Right, because it can be mitigated by holding one's breath or breathing through a wet cloth, and those are tactics ancient armies actually used when facing, like, smoke or dust.
Oh, that makes sense. So the lungs have some basic defensive.
Exactly. But the eyes are fundamentally different. Anatomically speaking, the eyes are essentially exposed extensions of the brain.
That is a deeply unsettling way to describe eyes.
It is, but it's true. They're packed with massive vascular networks and these highly permeable mucous membranes. And those membranes completely bypass many of the body's primary defensive filters, like the liver or the kidneys.
So it's just a shortcut directly into the bloodstream.
Not just the bloodstream, but a direct, practically unshielded pathway to the central nervous system.
Oh, wow.
In modern chemical warfare, there are actually specific agents designed to be absorbed ocularly. When these volatile compounds hit the moisture of the human eye, they don't just blind you.
What do?
They are rapidly absorbed. They cross the blood-brain barrier almost instantaneously. The texts we are looking at compare the Gorgon weapon to these modern agents.
And what happens with those modern agents?
Well, exposure results in immediate muscular rigidity, rapid onset of systemic organ failure, and total paralysis.
Okay, let me try to ground this for you listening. It's kind of like modern tear gas or pepper spray, but astronomically more lethal.
That's a great analogy.
Cause with pepper spray, the mechanism is severe irritation, right? The capsaicin hits the ocular membrane, it causes intense pain, and it forces your eyes shut.
Yes, exactly. It's an irritant.
But what these toxicology reports are describing is a nerve agent where the eye isn't the target of the pain, it's just the open door.
It's just the gateway.
Right, it's the gateway for a payload that aggressively shuts down the entire biological machine.
That is an excellent way to frame it,
Yeah.
and it perfectly explains why the ancient accounts are so hyper-focused on the act of looking.
Because that was the vector.
Yes, put yourself in the position of an ancient soldier who survives this encounter. They don't have the vocabulary for aerosolized neurotoxins or mucosal absorption.
Right, they can't see the invisible, localized chemical cloud hovering in the air.
Exactly. They just see cause and effect.
They observe that every single comrade who turns their head and looks directly at the source of the weapon instantly locks up.
They drop to the ground and die in a rigid state. So the empirical correlation they draw is practically flawless. You look at the thing, you die.
Therefore, the stare must be the weapon.
Right. The observation is completely accurate.
Yeah.
They just lacked the scientific framework to explain the invisible mist entering the ocular cavity.
Okay, but look, let me push back on this a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
Because if we are talking about an aerosolized spray, it completely changes how we view the hero of the story, Perseus.
It does recontextualize him entirely.
The famous legend is that Perseus uses his polished bronze shield as a mirror, right? So he can look backward and approach Medusa without meeting her gaze.
That's the classic telling, yes.
Isn't it much more likely that this is just a classic mythological trope like, don't look at the monster, use a reflection? Why do we have to jump straight to him wearing an ancient hazmat suit?
Well, it is a fair question. But if it were merely a magical trope, there wouldn't be such a specific mechanical solution in the text.
What do you mean?
Let's think about the physical reality of navigating a localized environment saturated with a highly toxic directional aerosol spray.
Yeah.
You simply cannot look forward.
Because the mist is in the air.
Right. Any direct exposure of your face to the air currents carrying the agent will result in lethal mucosal absorption.
So you have to mitigate that exposure vector somehow.
You have to completely block it. So by raising a large, solid bronze shield to cover his face and respiratory pathways,
Oh, I see.
and using the polished interior surface to navigate via reflection, Perseus is actually executing a highly sophisticated tactical maneuver.
He's using a physical barrier to deflect the directional spray of the aerosol.
Yes. While maintaining visual awareness of his environment, he isn't deflecting a magic spell. He is navigating a toxic spill zone without exposing his mucous membranes to the ambient air currents.
That is wild.
It completely strips away the magical romance of the myth, It replaces it with cold, calculated battlefield protocol.
When you lay it out like that, it actually makes the story much more intense. He's not just some magical hero. He's literally a biological weapons disposal unit moving blindly through a hot zone.
Exactly. It's a much grittier reality.
But this brings up a huge logistical problem, I think.
What's that?
Well, if we are dealing with an aerosolized spray, how do you actually manage that on a chaotic ancient battlefield?
Logistically speaking.
Right. Think about it. Wind shifts constantly, terrain is uneven, targets are moving around. If you just have a single directional spray, like, say, a single nozzle shooting gas, it's incredibly inefficient.
Because it's too targeted.
Yeah. The enemy can just flank it, or a sudden crosswind blows it right back at you. How does a Bronze Age device maintain a dense, high-pressure cloud of toxins in a totally unpredictable environment?
And that specific logistical problem is what brings us to the most terrifying visual aspect of the Gorgon myth.
The serpent hair.
The serpent hair. If we accept the premise that Medusa is a weapon, we have to transition from analyzing the molecular mechanism of the toxin to analyzing the physical engineering of its dispersal.
So the snakes aren't just for show.
No, the sources evaluate the snake hair not as a literal biological mutation, but as an advanced multi-vector delivery system.
A multi-vector delivery system. Okay, you need to break that jargon down for me, because when you say multi-vector, I'm picturing modern military drones or complex fluid dynamics.
Well, let's actually look at it through the lens of fluid dynamics.
Okay, I'm with you.
If you have a single nozzle dispersing a gas, you have a linear trajectory. It creates a narrow cone of saturation.
Right, like spraying a garden hose.
Exactly. And as you pointed out, it is highly susceptible to wind shear, and it can be easily avoided by just moving out of the direct line of fire.
You just step to the side.
Right. But if you want to create a localized zone of absolute area denial, a space where literally nothing can survive, you need heavy saturation.
How do you get that?
You achieve that by utilizing 20, 30, or 50 independent nozzles, all facing different directions, all oscillating and moving simultaneously.
Okay, but wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Are you telling me that a Bronze Age civilization people wearing leather sandals and fighting with spears built a mechanical drone with 50 oscillating nozzles?
I know how it sounds.
How is that historically possible? That just sounds like pure science fiction.
It sounds like an anachronism until you actually look at the history of ancient pneumatics.
Ancient pneumatics, like air pressure.
Yes. We know for a fact that later Greek engineers, like Hero of Alexandria, understood complex pneumatics. They used compressed air and even built early steam engines like the Aeolipile.
Oh, right, the spinning metal sphere thing.
Exactly. So the texts suggest that the Medusa weapon was an earlier, highly classified military application of these exact same principles.
Okay, so paint a picture of this device for me.
Imagine a pressurized central vessel, perhaps constructed from layered, cured animal bladders that are wrapped in reinforced leather and bronze fittings.
So it can hold a lot of pressure.
Right, and attached to this central pressure chamber are dozens of flexible hollow tubes, likely made of treated animal intestines or maybe early rubber derivatives.
And these tubes are capped with something.
Yes, capped with narrow bronze apertures, small nozzles.
So when the central chamber is highly pressurized and the valves are opened,
The high-pressure gas is forced violently through these narrow, flexible tubes.
and what does a pressurized hose do when it's loose and unrestrained? It writhes.
It whips around violently in every single direction.
And what does high-pressure gas sound like when it's being forced through a tiny metal aperture? It hisses.
Precisely. The acoustic signature of the weapon is a chorus of hissing.
That is just, wow.
And the kinetic visual signature is dozens of tubes writhing and whipping in the air.
So to an ancient hoplite who has never seen pneumatic technology,
Who only understands the natural world? Yes. The only vocabulary they have to describe this terrifying, hissing, writhing crown of movement is a head of angry snakes.
that is absolutely chilling. It's not a monster, it's an out-of-control pressure valve.
Exactly. And mathematically speaking, the spray pattern from that would be absolutely devastating.
I can imagine.
The sources actually cite modern laboratory simulations that model this exact chaotic dispersal method.
Really? They tested it.
They ran fluid dynamic simulations comparing a single directional spray to a cluster of independent, wildly oscillating multi-directional dispensers.
And what were the results?
The cluster maximizes chemical coverage exponentially. The chaotic movement creates these overlapping Venn diagrams of toxic mist.
So there are no gaps in the coverage.
None. It generates an impenetrable, localized cloud that constantly shifts and adapts to the immediate air currents.
I want you listening to really visualize this for a second. Put yourself in the bronze armor of an ancient soldier. You are marching forward.
The dust is kicking up.
Suddenly you hear this deafening mechanical hissing sound. You look ahead and through the haze you see this device.
Writhing around.
It's constantly moving, constantly adapting the trajectory of the spray. You can't dodge to the left because a different nozzle is already whipping in that direction.
You are totally walled off.
You are walled off by an invisible, overlapping mist. And you know that if even a microscopic fraction of that aerosol makes contact with the moisture of your eyes, your life is over.
It really is the pinnacle of both chemical and psychological warfare.
Because you can't even approach it.
Right. The chaotic multi-vector saturation guarantees that the front line of an advancing army cannot simply rush the weapon. They're going to walk directly into a high-density zone of ocular entry neurotoxins. It removes any safe angle of approach.
Okay, so let's say the absolute worst happens. The mist makes contact.
It hits the eyes?
It hits the eyes, it crosses the mucous membranes, it enters the bloodstream. What physically happens to the human body?
That's where it gets really dark.
Because we've established it's not a magic spell. The history adamantly recorded it as turning men to solid stone. Why stone? What is the actual payload of this biological weapon doing to the anatomy of the victim?
This is where the forensic biochemistry presented in our sources becomes incredibly dense, but deeply, deeply fascinating.
Walk me through it.
To understand the myth, we have to decode the biochemistry of calcified paralysis.
Calcified paralysis.
The toxicology reports analyzed this legendary transformation into stone as a rapid-onset biological process of hypercalcification, and it's triggered by the specific neurotoxins in the Gorgon payload.
Hypercalcification. I mean, I know calcium is what makes our bones hard, but break down exactly how flooding the body with calcium paralyzes someone.
To understand the weapon, we have to quickly look at how normal human muscles work. Muscle contraction is entirely governed by calcium ions.
Okay, simple enough.
When your brain wants to move your arm, the nerve impulse travels down the axon and reaches the neuromuscular junction. It sends a signal that opens specific calcium channels in your muscle cells.
So the channels open up.
Calcium floods into the muscle fibers, which causes two specific proteins, actin and myosin, to bind together and pull tight. That right there is a muscle contraction.
So every time I flex my bicep, I'm basically flooding it with calcium.
Yes, exactly. But to relax that bicep, your body has to actively expend energy, specifically ATP, to pump that calcium back out of the muscle fibers and into storage.
Oh, so relaxing takes energy too.
It is a constant, beautifully balanced cycle of flooding and pumping.
So what does the Gorgon toxin do to that cycle?
It utterly destroys it.
Oh, God.
The sources compare the Gorgon venom to contemporary biosynthetic agents that attack those specific ion channels and lock them permanently open.
So the calcium just keeps pouring in.
The muscles flood with a catastrophic amount of calcium. The actin and myosin violently bind together in a maximal contraction. And because the channels are jammed open, the body simply cannot pump the calcium back out.
It gets stuck.
The muscles absolutely refuse to release.
I want to make sure I'm fully grasping this. It's like injecting rapid-setting concrete into a biological system.
That's a really good way to picture it.
Because when you add water to cement powder, a violent chemical reaction happens, locking the molecules together into a rigid structure. This venom acts like the water in that equation.
Exactly.
The moment it touches your bloodstream, it triggers a chain reaction that locks your muscle fibers together permanently.
That is a very apt analogy. Another clinical parallel the sources draw is immediate, chemically induced rigor mortis.
Rigor mortis happens after you die, right?
Normally, yes. In a normal post-mortem scenario, the body stops producing ATP. Without that energy, the calcium pumps fail, the muscles flood, and the corpse locks up into a rigid state over several hours.
Okay, so it's a slow process naturally.
Right. But the Medusa payload induces a hyperaccelerated chemical version of this process in a matter of seconds. And the worst part is, it happens while the victim is still fully conscious.
That is horrific. You are trapped inside your own suddenly immovable body.
It's nightmare fuel.
But the texts go further than just muscular paralysis, right? Because rigor mortis makes you stiff, sure, but it doesn't make you feel like literal stone.
They do go further. This is where the term hypercalcification is truly applied in the papers.
Okay, what does that mean in this context?
The sources suggest this wasn't just standard nerve paralysis. They point to parallels between the theoretical Gorgon venom and rare biological agents that cause rapid-onset ossification.
Ossification, like bone growth.
Yes. The toxin doesn't just freeze the electrical signals. It fundamentally alters the physical density of the organic tissue.
But how is that biologically possible? I mean, tissues don't just magically turn to rock.
They don't magically turn to rock, no. But minerals can and do solidify inside soft tissue naturally.
Like what? Give me an example.
Think about kidney stones or severe gout.
Oh, ouch. Yeah.
In those conditions, specific chemical imbalances cause uric acid or calcium to precipitate out of the bloodstream. They crystallize into hard, jagged stones inside soft organs or joints.
Right, which is incredibly painful.
Now, scale that up catastrophically. The Gorgon payload causes massive amounts of calcium salts to instantly precipitate out of the blood and deposit directly into the violently contracted muscle tissue.
So the muscles are literally filling up with microscopic bone fragments or mineral crystals.
Essentially, yes. The tissue becomes rigidly calcified. The density of the muscle mass fundamentally changes.
Let's put ourselves back on that ancient battlefield.
Okay, set the scene.
I'm a Bronze Age soldier. I don't know anything about actin, myosin, or calcium ion channels.
None of that vocabulary exists yet.
What I see is my friend turning to look at this hissing machine. Instantly, his entire body locks up in a violent, unnatural spasm.
Because of the massive contraction.
And because the vascular system is constricting so rapidly, his skin probably turns completely pale, losing all color.
Yes, extreme pallor would be immediate.
He falls over, frozen in a pose of absolute agony. And if I survive the battle and I walk up to my friend's body an hour later and touch his arm, The muscle isn't just stiff.
It's changed.
It is literally rock hard. The tissue is densely packed with calcium crystals.
To that ancient soldier, the empirical evidence presented to his senses is that a living man was just transformed into rigid, pale stone.
Because he doesn't have the terminology of modern toxicology.
He relies on analogy. He says his flesh became as hard as stone.
And over 500 years of oral tradition, flesh as hard as stone, slowly mutates into the myth of a man literally transforming into a marble statue.
Exactly, it gets literalized. But when you apply a forensic breakdown to the ancient accounts, the symptomology matches hypercalcification perfectly.
It's a perfect match.
The sudden and total muscular stasis, the extreme pallor due to instantaneous vascular shutdown, the anomalous, rock-hard rigidity of the corpse. It is a flawlessly documented clinical observation of a biosynthetic paralytic strike.
Preserved for millennia as a fairy tale.
Exactly.
Which really begs a massive question. If this was a weapon, and it did exactly what the toxicology suggests it did, the chemistry required to synthesize this payload is staggering.
It's incredibly advanced.
You don't just stumble upon a volatile, aerosolized, hypercalcifying neurotoxin in the woods. There has to be a deep systemic understanding of biochemistry to engineer something like this.
And that profound level of understanding is precisely what the sources pivot to next.
Okay, where do they go?
To truly grasp the sophistication of the civilization that engineered the Medusa Protocol, we have to look past the deployment of the weapon. We need to examine the manual of its creation. We have to look closely at the forensic analysis of Gorgon blood.
Right, because the story of Medusa doesn't just end with Perseus cutting off her head.
No, it goes on.
There's a whole secondary, almost bizarre narrative about what happens to her blood afterward. And this is where the texts start comparing ancient myth to modern pharmacology, isn't it?
It is. The sources investigate what classical literature refers to as the dual nature of Medusa's blood.
Dual nature, meaning it does two different things.
Exactly. In the ancient myths, it is specifically and repeatedly recorded that blood taken from the left side of the Gorgon was a lethal, petrifying toxin.
Which is the weapon we've been talking about.
Right, but blood taken from the right side was a miraculous cure. It was capable of regenerating life, stopping hemorrhages, and healing almost any wound.
I have a really hard time buying that part.
It sounds too neat, right?
Yeah. How can the ultimate biological weapon, a chemical designed to instantly ossify human tissue, also be a regenerative medicine? It sounds like we are drifting right back into magic.
It does sound like an impossible contradiction, until you look at how modern science handles highly toxic substances.
What do you mean?
Some of the most potent, life-saving medications we use in modern hospitals are actually synthesized directly from lethal biological venoms.
Wait, really? Like, what?
The classic example is the development of modern ACE inhibitors.
Oh, for blood pressure.
Yes. Millions of people take these drugs daily to treat high blood pressure and prevent heart failure. But the core mechanism for those drugs was originally isolated and synthesized from the venom of the Brazilian pit viper.
Are you kidding? A snake venom.
A very deadly one.
Oh.
In nature, that venom is designed to cause a catastrophic, lethal drop in the prey's blood pressure. It kills them almost instantly.
Wow. But if you tweak it?
If you isolate that specific hypotensive mechanism, refine it, and strictly control the dosage, that exact same lethal mechanism becomes a highly effective, life-saving medical catalyst.
So it's just about how you use it.
Exactly. A poison is very often just a medicine with the wrong application or the wrong dosage.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does that map onto the Gorgon blood?
The chemical structure described in the allegories of Gorgon blood maps perfectly to the way modern chemists synthesize paralytics and antivenom.
So they were doing this back then?
The texts suggest that the ancient engineers were starting with a highly volatile base compound. To make the weapon, they had to isolate the active calcifying agents.
Right.
But during that same process, they were able to isolate the counteragents, the neutralizing enzymes, or perhaps compounds that forcefully dilated blood vessels and promoted extreme cellular regeneration.
Basically, the medical antidotes.
Yes.
So when the myth explicitly says blood from the left side kills and blood from the right side cures, it obviously isn't talking about the literal left and right veins of a decapitated monster.
No, it's allegorical.
It is a set of encrypted instructions.
That is the fundamental argument of the paper titled The Medusa Protocol. The authors posit that the myth functioned as an oral technical manual for the storage, handling, and application of volatile biohazardous materials.
Why not just write it down on a scroll?
Consider the context of a highly secretive ancient military guild. Written language might be limited, or, more likely, the absolute secrecy of your top-tier military technology was paramount.
Oh, like classified documents today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You cannot risk writing down the exact chemical formula for your superweapon on a scroll that a spy could just steal.
So how do you safely transmit complex chemical formulas, refinement procedures, and hazmat safety protocols across generations of military engineers?
You encode it in a story. You create an allegorical narrative that is so culturally pervasive, so terrifying and memorable that the data survives intact for centuries.
That is
The
brilliant.
story of Medusa was meticulously designed to teach chemical handlers both the offensive capabilities and the medicinal antidotes of the bioagent.
Let me see if I can translate the myth into a hazard manual just based on what we've talked about.
Go for it. Let's hear it.
So the left side and right side distinction is actually a mnemonic device for laboratory technicians. It signifies that the raw base compound requires a bifurcated refinement process.
Exactly. Bifurcated meaning split into two distinct chemical pathways.
Right. So the myth is literally telling the handler, warning, this base compound is highly lethal. If you process it through pathway A, the left side, it yields the payload for a hypercalcifying weapon.
Handle with extreme caution.
Do not expose your eyes to the aerosolized form. Use reflective shielding for navigation during deployment. However, if you process the base compound through pathway B, the right side, it yields powerful restorative agents and the necessary antivenom.
That is precisely how the sources decode the text. The myth is a perfectly preserved standard operating procedure for an ancient biochemical weapons division.
It's all right there.
It tells them the delivery method, which is ocular. It details the physical mechanism, the multi-vector aerosol snakes. It outlines the physiological payload, which is calcification, and it provides the chemical synthesis protocol via the left and right blood.
It is staggering to think that we have been reading a Bronze Age hazardous materials manual as a children's fairy tale.
It really changes your perspective.
We thought we were reading about the whims of the Greek gods, and we were actually reading the classified schematics of a lost technology. It implies an underlying layer of scientific literacy in the ancient world that was intentionally obscured through storytelling.
It forces us to completely reevaluate the entire corpus of ancient literature.
I mean, what else is hiding in plain sight?
Exactly. But before we get to those broader implications, we have to zoom out and look at the practical application.
Right, taking it out of the lab.
We have the engineered weapon. We understand the horrific payload. We've decoded the technical manual for its synthesis. The final piece of the puzzle is the battlefield.
How did they actually use it?
How did ancient commanders deploy the Medusa protocol? How do you take this terrifying science experiment out of the laboratory and use it to win a war?
That is a fascinating transition because it moves us from chemistry into ancient tactical warfare. And the sources treat Medusa not just as a weapon, but as a strategic blueprint for aerosolized area denial.
Yes, and we need to define area denial in this context. While it is a modern military term, the strategic concept is ancient.
What does it mean exactly?
Area denial means utilizing a weapon, a barrier, or a tactic to completely prevent an adversary from occupying or traversing a specific piece of terrain.
So you're not necessarily trying to kill everyone.
No, the goal isn't necessarily to kill every single soldier in the enemy army. The goal is to make the battlefield itself impassable and force a retreat.
And a lingering, invisible aerosol cloud of hypercalcifying neurotoxin is the ultimate area denial weapon.
To understand how devastating this would be, we have to look at how ancient Mediterranean armies fought.
Okay, set the scene.
The dominant tactical formation of the era was the phalanx. This was a tightly packed, massive block of infantry, usually heavily armored hoplites, marching in absolute unison.
Right, they are literally standing shoulder to shoulder,
overlapping their large bronze shields to create a wall. The entire strength of the phalanx relies on its cohesion and forward momentum.
It is an ancient human tank, but it only works if everyone is moving together. If the guy in front of you stops, the whole formation piles up.
Precisely. The phalanx is powerful, but it is rigid and highly vulnerable to disruption.
So how do you disrupt it with Medusa?
Imagine you are a commander deploying the Medusa protocol against an advancing phalanx. You don't need to gas the entire army. You simply position the multi-vector aerosol dispersers, the hissing serpent heads, at a critical choke point, or you deploy them directly at the enemy vanguard.
You open the valves, the hissing starts, the mist is released.
The front line of the enemy formation marches directly into the invisible localized cloud.
And they can't even see it coming.
Instantly, the ocular neurotoxins make contact with the moisture of their eyes.
This is where it becomes a weapon of mass psychological terror. Imagine the impact on an advancing army. The soldiers in the very front rank instantly seize up.
Their muscles flood with calcium.
They calcify into rigid, pale statues mid-stride.
And because of the momentum of the phalanx, the soldiers in the second and third ranks are suddenly violently pushing up against a wall of their own rock-hard, paralyzed comrades.
Oh, man. The forward momentum of the human tank is instantly broken.
The physical formation shatters, but the psychological effect has to be infinitely worse.
Because the men in the back ranks can't see the gas. All they see is that the men in the front just turn to stone.
They have no idea what's happening.
They are witnessing what appears to be absolute, undeniable divine retribution. The gods themselves are turning their army into statues.
The panic would be instantaneous, contagious, and absolute.
Morale completely evaporates.
The line breaks, the soldiers drop their heavy shield to run, the army routs, and the battle is decisively won, with virtually zero hand-to-hand casualties for the deploying force.
And what happens to the battlefield afterward?
This is where the area denial aspect really solidifies. The heavy aerosol cloud doesn't just dissipate instantly.
It hangs around.
It lingers in the low-lying areas of the battlefield. It renders that entire swath of terrain completely impassable for hours, or perhaps even days.
So it's effectively protecting your flank.
Or securing a mountain pass without needing to station a single soldier there.
It is brutally, terrifyingly efficient. You deploy the device, the vanguard locks up in hyper-calcified rigor mortis, the army flees in terror, and the battlefield is contaminated.
It's a flawless victory.
But looking at the sheer dominance of this weapon brings up a really important question about the source's final analysis.
Okay, what is it?
If an ancient civilization had developed a biological weapon this dominant, this technologically and chemically advanced, why hide it?
Ah, I see.
Why was this incredible science encrypted within a myth about a cursed woman with snakes for hair? Why not just write down a military manual and teach it in an academy? Let your whole empire know you have this power.
The answer is information security. In the ancient world, just as in the modern world, technological supremacy is incredibly fragile.
It only lasts until the other guy gets it.
Right. If you possess a weapon that can single-handedly shatter an enemy army without drawing a sword, the absolute most important thing you can do is protect the mechanism of that weapon.
Because if the enemy figures it out,
If you write down a literal recipe for a biosynthetic paralytic and a detailed engineering diagram of a pneumatic aerosol dispersal device, and an enemy spy steals that clay tablet or papyrus scroll,
your strategic advantage is instantly gone.
completely gone. They will reverse engineer the chemistry, build their own multi-vector